rounds in the preliminaries. Where's Magnus Carlsen?
He's keeping us guessing.
Yeah, he is making the moves there, and he seems to be repeating the same strategy that he did in game one.
Yep, the invisible man, Magnus Carlsen. And right now, it's pretty much the exact same position as he had against Artemiev. And in that position, Magnus pushed his pawn forward, and it's the same again. Last time, we saw Artemiev capture this white pawn, but long-term, 40 moves down the line, we saw white's extra central pawn come in handy, and actually, Abdusattorov repeating the exact same opening. Did he look at Magnus Carlsen's previous game? Is this something he studied before, or is he freestyling? We will find out. This is slightly different to the last game, but it might well transpose back to Carlsen against Artemiev. Right now, I'm expecting Magnus to go and capture that black pawn with the white knight on the edge of the board. And very level position, but Magnus clearly likes these types of pawn structures. So let's see whether Abdusattorov can handle it better than Vladislav Artemiev did.
Mm-hmm.
And temporarily, we see a picture of Magnus while he tries to sort out his camera. In the last game, Magnus was quite keen on setting up with what we call a double fianchetto. So that means pushing the white b-pawn forward one square in order to create a nice diagonal for the white dark-squared bishop. Jovanka, do you think we'll see the repetition of that? Is it surprising to you that Magnus has played the same opening twice in a row? He nearly never does that.
Yeah, it is not surprising to me, because I think that he's just trying to play for a game with no risk, you know. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he had a pleasant position out of the opening. I mean, I wouldn't say it was anything more than equal, but still, it was okay. He can play the moves at tempo. And to be honest, Nodirbek would probably have had, what, 5 minutes to prepare?
Yeah.
That's not enough.
Possibly not. Abdusattorov did finish his game quite quickly, I think, in the last round. So maybe he was watching that game that Magnus was still playing. I think maybe he had 20, 30 minutes to prepare. Also, possibly he had a coach watching Magnus's game, being like, OK, Magnus has played this opening. It's not great. If you do this, you'll have a fine position.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's surprising to me. Although Magnus has admitted, for example, in our podcast, that these days he's reliant more on openings than before, on opening preparation. And he does repeat the same idea.
He does repeat the same idea. I mean, one approach that I take, because I play a lot of the same stuff, you know, always the same opening, is that I'm just like, well, you know, I've actually studied this for, say, 15 hours. You've studied it for half an hour. I think I win. Oh, but we have a change.
Yep, the first new move of the game. So white, instead of bringing his bishop out to the longest possible diagonal, he's pushed the bishop 2 squares. So last time we saw Magnus just move that bishop 1 square. Now 2 squares, he's attacking black's pawn on the c5 square with his dark squared bishop. And this one looks a bit surprising. Black can defend that pawn in a few ways, but maybe Magnus is trying to ask a question. He's trying to set a trap, because if Abdusattorov defends this weak pawn, this undefended pawn, in the most natural way by pushing forward here, then suddenly, look at this bishop, it's opened up. And white's knight, for example, could spring forward, and suddenly there's pressure, there's some real problems along this diagonal. We could see a trade of knights here, and the black rook is under fire. If it moves, the white knight could spring forward once again with a double attack, what we call a fork. And yeah, this would spell danger for Abdusattorov. So that being said, maybe he can defend the pawn in a different way. Not the most natural way, not the move he wants to play, this b6 move, because of the white bishop opening up, but instead, possibly, we'll see him retreat his knight, defending this pawn, but also opening up his own bishop. This type of position is all about those bishops on their long diagonals, and this is the move I'm expecting to see. I'm slightly curious about what Magnus intends here. OK, he brings the knight into a different...
Yeah,
to a different square.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that this was, for me, the most natural move, because your move was actually top computer choice.
Yeah, I think I've studied that exact position before. Maybe that's why. But why does this move appeal to you? It defends this pawn, opens up the bishop.
Because. And actually, I think this is maybe a slight inaccuracy from black, because, yes, OK, it attacks the rook, but the rooks, the knights are not secure in their posts. And the reason why instinctively I perhaps would not have retreated the knight is that I would be stressing for a long time about this light squared bishop that black has. Maybe it gets just trapped on the sideline and will never get out.
Yep, so if you'd gone the other way to the square I suggested, maybe this bishop is not so happy. That's why Abdusattorov chose a different square. But now after Magnus moved his rook, centralised his rook, as you mentioned, this knight is slightly loose.
Totally loose. And also that pawn that the bishop on a3 is attacking is also loose.
Yep. Exactly. Once this knight gets kicked away, this pawn will suddenly be falling. And I've had so much experience on this type of position with white and black, and I hate putting my knights on these types of squares because now it might be a target for white's bishop, it might be a target from white's queen, it might just get hit by a pawn. Black is going to have to lose time with that knight sooner or later. This piece looks nice and active, it's in white's half, but it's going to have to get kicked back at some point. So, OK, Abdusattorov played that quite quickly. Is this part of his opening preparation? Does he have a plan in mind? Or will we see him suddenly realise that this knight is a target for white?
I think Magnus has just been very sneaky and tricked Abdusattorov into a worse position. I mean, it's not losing for Abdusattorov. Just simply Magnus has a very, very comfortable position, and all to do with the power of the light square bishop.
Yeah, and this is to do with what you were saying earlier, Jovanka. So you specialise in a set number of openings and you know them inside out. You've got so much experience with them. And actually Magnus repeating what he did in the first round, but just a tiny change has maybe confused his opponent. Yeah. And that's why I often recommend your approach, just specialising in one opening. You know all the different move orders, you know all the different tricks. As long as you're not too predictable, as long as you vary every now and then, sometimes you catch your opponent out, and Abdusattorov doesn't look too happy now.
I have to say on that subject, I've made it a point that I've been studying now for 2 weeks in a row on Chessable, my Carlsen opening, and every day I've been studying this one specific variation and trying to get the nuances in. So, and even then I get my move orders muddled, but, every time I practice, it gets better and better. And I'm just... But
how deep are we talking into?
We're talking pretty deep.
Yeah?
We're
not talking like the first 5
No, we're not talking the first 5 moves. We're talking about something very complicated.
Yeah.
And we're talking about like these really wild positions where you have to know where things go and you have to know about those opportune moments. And that's what I've been doing. And I'm like, come on.
Can't wait to get it in the game.
Someone play this line against me.
OK, meanwhile, we do have a move from the Uzbek Grandmaster. He's brought his knight forward. So both black knights actually sitting in white's half. And that knight can be captured. That black knight is actually hitting white's pawn in the corner, white's A pawn. It's hard to defend that guy. So I'm expecting white to trade off his dark square bishop for that black knight. Black would have to recapture with a pawn, meaning he has doubled pawns, but in return, black does gain the advantage, or what we regard as an advantage, of the bishop pair. So very logical Abdusattorov's last move. Maybe it was forced, maybe there was just no other option to keep black's position intact. So rather than just sit still and try and kind of push pawns, protecting everything, which wouldn't have worked, he has leapt forward with his knight, and he's trying to be a bit more dynamic. It's one thing I've noticed about Abdusattorov, and maybe what makes him stand out amongst all of the talented teenagers these days, is that he is quite dynamic. And he often does take risks and he backs them up. He justifies those risks with tactics.
Yeah.
So, interesting move.
One thing I noticed about Abdusattorov, especially in the World Rapid Championship, is that he was so resilient. He found himself in so many lost positions and he kept surviving and he turned those games around, and he defeated a whole string of top grandmasters. It wasn't just Magnus, it was also Fabiano Caruana, Levon Aronian, Boris Gelfand. It was like a who's who of chess, and Nepomniachtchi as well. And
he just seemed so mentally strong, like even after winning, it was just, I won, but now I need to focus on the next thing. It didn't seem to bother him at all that he had just won a world championship.
And one thing I noticed from the video was towards the final stages, he actually seemed pretty nervous. I mean, he didn't look like he was super calm. And I was really impressed by how he controlled those emotions to go on and just defeat Magnus. So that was very, very impressive. And here, he's using his resourcefulness now, just trying to find the most dynamic solution. I like bishop takes knight.
Yeah, maybe we can jump in just to see what might happen over the next few moves. So we're expecting, as you mentioned, bishop takes knight. This knight cannot be allowed to live too much longer because it is attacking a pawn. It doesn't look like an important pawn necessarily, but this pawn, once it falls, will allow black to attack the white rook. So we're expecting a trade, and now might be the time to kick back this knight from the centre. You don't want to push it back with a pawn, because suddenly this knight will find a dream outpost. And outposts are squares that cannot be challenged by the opponent's pawns, and also often supported by your own pawn. So this knight would just be a monster right now, and it cannot be allowed to infiltrate into white's camp. I think the most natural move would be to develop the queen, attacking the knight in the process. And if, for example, the knight does retreat, now we might see Magnus do something he did in the last game against Artemiev, just start pushing these pawns forward. And black does have the bishop pair, especially this black dark squared bishop is going to be unchallenged on this diagonal later on. But in return, black does have a compromised pawn structure. These are doubled pawns in an endgame. They're not going to be great. And it also means white has one extra central pawn compared to black, 2 versus 1. So that's where Magnus will play. He'll push forward in the center. And this is what I'm expecting, at least, to happen over the next few moves. We're expecting bishop takes knight, and then maybe the queen will start harassing this black knight in the center.
Obviously, we can't see Magnus because his camera is down, but how do you think he is feeling about the situation right now? Is this a game that he will be enjoying playing right now?
Yeah, I don't think he'll be unhappy. He doesn't necessarily have an advantage. The evaluation bar is still kind of undecided. It still doesn't give much for white. So he won't be thinking about whether he's better, whether he's worse, whether he's on the defensive. He'll just be thinking, OK, it's a rich position, full of life, full of energy, still all the pieces on the board. There's only been a trade of one set of pawns. And that means he can put his own stamp on the position. He can try his own ideas. He will hope to outmaneuver Abdusattorov. And actually, the World Rapid Championship, one area I realised that Abdusattorov was doing very well. Firstly, in the openings, he was very well prepared, but it was often when things simplified, where he could just use his sharpness, his resilience, his 2-move tactics here and there. I've played him online many times at Blitz, and in terms of 2-3-move tactics, there's not many players quicker than him. So Magnus, he maybe just wants to keep pieces on the board and make it strategic, just slow and manoeuvring. So
do you think that is Magnus's tactic when he's facing now Abdusattorov?
It would be my tactic.
Pieces on the board, basically.
Yeah, and he didn't go for that trade, so maybe it is one of his strategies. He's brought his knight into the centre of the board. Now, black's knight, both of black's knights are loose, both of white's knights are loose, but the bishops have opened up. So white's light square bishop hitting the black knight in the centre. Suddenly there's some crazy tactics. I'm trying to work out what's about to happen. Ivanka, does that move surprise you? It surprises me for sure.
I was actually thinking about that move.
Okay, yeah.
I just didn't want to suggest it, so I thought, okay, I like your bishop takes knight. But I was thinking about this move primarily because it is a motif in different positions with slightly similar pawn structure. And, you know, they say loose pieces drop off. But I was trying to work out what's going to happen with black, say he tries to reinforce that knight rather than move it back. I mean, can he get away with that?
Okay.
No, he retreats the knight.
Okay, so just to explain white's move, the reason I was so shocked is because white's knights now are a bit loose. Knights protecting each other, they might look very nice, but actually if one of them gets undermined, the other one might often fall. So later on, there might be ideas such as pushing this pawn, kicking away this knight, and then suddenly the other knight will drop once it runs away. So, yeah, the reasoning behind Magnus's move was to attack this knight simply, and Ivanka mentioned trying to reinforce it, maybe bringing this bishop out, but that would be a bit loose as well. Maybe this pawn could push forward. So many tactics, so many loose pieces. I'm not sure whose pieces are going to drop off, but some pieces are definitely going to drop off, and that is why Abdusattorov decided, OK, time to play it safe, retreat the knight. And now, OK, we do see a trade. I'm surprised by that one. It feels like Magnus, he's rushing slightly with that knight exchange. I thought maybe you just leave it and wait for black to exchange on this square, and you have a move in the meantime.
But that's what I thought as well. Very odd.
Very odd. And now he's taken this knight. 2 choices for Abdusattorov, to take with the pawn or take with the queen. If he takes with the pawn, I think we'll see Magnus now take this knight. OK, this has happened, so I'm expecting Magnus now to take this knight. He has done. And now, again, choices for black. If he takes this bishop, the white knight will simply step back, and black has these double pawns. This white bishop is great as well. I think white has a small advantage here. Not much, but small. And if black goes for the other option of taking this knight with his bishop, then we'll see Magnus simply drop back. And actually, this might be similar to his game against Artemiev, where he'll start pushing central pawns.
Exactly, and that looks very unpleasant. I mean, for white, again, Magnus will have all the long-term trumps. So you can see Abdusattorov just simply goes, OK, fine, I'm going to have the bad pawn structure, but in return, I'm going to have, well, dynamic play with the 2 bishops.
Yep, and these pawns, as we mentioned, doubled and not great. It will be difficult to create a pass pawn on that left side of the board, but then again, this bishop in particular, very, very strong. Now, there's a pawn attacked, and if Abdusattorov just takes a time out to defend it, for example, with his own pawn, I think we'll see white's knight remaneuver to a great square, a nice outpost in the centre. He'll bring it forward, and no matter what black does next, he'll plonk it in the middle of the board. And here, it cannot be challenged by any black pawns. It's also defended by white's bishop, and This knight looking pretty good. That's why Abdusattorov doesn't really have time to just push pawns. He brings his queen forward instead. He wants to create threats with every move. Here he's attacking a pawn, because otherwise, if he allows White's knight to relocate to the centre, to that magical d5 square that we highlighted, White is simply doing well. So, OK, Abdusattorov trying to justify his opening play with threats, with dynamic activity.
And actually, there's a serious question to Magnus in the following position that we have up on the analysis board. Is how are you going to defend that pawn that's under attack? Because if you're a bit careless, maybe Black can actually trade the light squared bishop that he has for the knight. So I'm just thinking if you go rook that square, and then the light square bishop can come out to the f5 square and say, woohoo,
Yep, that's
bishop takes knight.
That's a very annoying pin as well, because if White ever wants to break that tension, pushing a pawn forward, then Black will happily just step back, and suddenly this pawn blocks this White bishop. It's all about piece activity, and White doesn't want to block in his best pieces. So I think you're right, Jovanka. Even if White actually wins a pawn in this position, it's not going to be great for White, because at some point you get kicked back, and then we see a trade, and these two pawns, we talk about double pawns, they're useless. They're basically just one pawn. Opposite colour bishops, and most likely leading to a draw. So Magnus doesn't want to play passively. He doesn't want to go on the defence. Instead, he goes active. He's playing on the front foot.
Going on the counter-attack. This is something that we often, well, one can often forget when they find their pieces attacked, that yes, you actually have the possibility of counter-attacking rather than passively defending. This is something that Levon Aronian was fantastic in Berlin, in the Grand Prix.
Yeah, this one game between Levon Aronian and Vincent Keimer, who's also here. That's one of the games, one of the best games I've seen in my whole life, just in terms of counter-attacking.
Yeah.
Every move, Keimer would, the German player, would attack something of Levon's, and Levon would just leave it and attack something of his. And it was just attack, followed by counter-attack, attack, counter-attack, attack, counter-attack. And in the end, Aronian emerged victorious. It was a crazy game.
It absolutely was. But this comes with a word of warning. When it comes to counter-attacking, you have to be able to calculate all the consequences. You can't just counter-attack for the sake of counter-attacking.
So that's going to be easier in classical chess than in rapid.
We have more time.
Yeah.
And it comes from years of practice. Aronian, he's one of the most creative players in the world, but he's only got there through training hard on calculation. I remember in that game, for example, his queen was attacked. He just ignored it, just pushed a pawn to attack his opponent's queen. And this is the type of thing that's happening here, just with lower stakes. Magnus knew his pawn was attacked, no good way to defend it, so counter-attacking against Black's pawn. And interesting, I quite like it from White, but the computer doesn't, I notice. So very, very surprising. I was going to say, if queen takes pawn now, White's knight does jump forward and will leap forward into an even better square in the centre.
Yeah, that is a dream square. But, you know, computers are computers. They play perfect chess. And they can play in their own little league and leave the emotional chess and all the things that...
And the exciting chess.
Exactly.
Yes.
For us.
For us humans. And I can see a lot of lovely selfies that you're all sending us. Keep them coming and use the hashtag #ChessChamps. And I just also wanted to share with you on that subject of selfies, one that I particularly liked. It comes from Heidi the H-Pawn, who says that they're ready for the Airthings Masters, and thanks the Champs Chess Tour for the nice I found the winning move mug from Askild. Another one. But this one also they also had a bonus mug, which was the Chess24 Caracan mug, and they were just there to say hello to me. So also a big hello to Heidi and everyone.
Yeah. A big hello to everyone around the world sending us selfies and following the exciting chess here. We're so excited that all of you around the world are joining us in this very first day of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. And whoa, look at the bar.
Yeah.
I finally got to say that today.
Yeah, it was going to happen. It was going to happen at some point, and I'm surprised as well. I mean, that looks like a very sensible move by Abdusattorov. I would be shocked if it was a blunder. I don't think it's a blunder, maybe just a small strategic mistake, but I'm struggling to understand why. Black's bishop has come out. You mentioned this plan, Jovanka. That black bishop, it just wants to trade itself off for White's knight, and therefore Magnus has run away with his knight to capture a black pawn. So temporarily, at least, Magnus is a pawn up. But then again, look at the bar. Look at this
What's happening?
Undecided about what's happening. I'm trying to work out how Black now can try to destabilise the white knight and the white rook protecting it. If you can kick away the white rook, the white knight might fall, might drop off the board. So maybe Black's light squared bishop's going to take a step back to attack that rook. suddenly it's really heating up. There are tactics, there are tricks, and that is actually the best move. We see here, Stockfish, the computer has 3 suggestions, but one is far better than the others.
And it's on the board.
Abdusattorov finds it.
Impressive stuff. Now, should the control room now find a less smiling picture of Magnus? Is it dangerous for him right now?
It's definitely dangerous, and actually this is really interesting. We again see the computer suggestions. White's rook now is under attack from black's bishop, but the computer says the only way white can hold the balance is by giving up his rook for a bishop. The rook worth 5, the bishop worth 3, that is a big sacrifice, a big commitment to make. The computer just wants to move white's queen across 2 squares or across just 1 square to the left, and I think especially the computer's top choice there, queen to b1, that is barely human. That is going to be incredibly difficult to find. Indirectly defending white's knight with the white queen.
Yeah.
Ivanka,
the only way he's going to find it is if he starts calculating the rook moving along the 4th row, keeping an eye on the knight. And if he works out that maybe that's a forced draw or maybe even losing, then he will look at other options. I mean, we have seen on the 2021 tour that Magnus was not shy of sacrificing the exchange, a rook for a bishop.
But here it's not just sacrificing the exchange.
To put the queen onto that square, that's tricky.
Yeah, so just to explain why the sacrifice is necessary, as Ivanka mentioned, the rook needs to stay on this 4th rank to defend the knight next to it. You need to defend this knight. If you run away from the attack, for example, if you step back, the knight does fall to the black queen. The problem is, where do you put the rook? No matter where you put it, you will get attacked, for example, by a black pawn or even by the black bishop. And sometime soon, you will have to evacuate the 4th rank. That's why it's best to just leave the rook here. Maybe just by process of elimination, Magnus will realize you can't really move this rook to a safe square. No matter where you move, you will just get attacked. And therefore, the computer says, bring the queen across 2 squares. But the reason I think this is not human, the reason I think this is so difficult to find is because you have to see that your queen indirectly will protect the white knight after the black bishop captures your rook and you take back. To see that the queen opens up on this line, which was previously blocked, that is incredibly difficult. I think even if I had an hour on my clock, I would struggle to find a move like that one. So computers, they do enlighten us sometimes, but that is incredibly tough to find. I think maybe the second choice by the computer is slightly more natural. So in this position, just bring the queen across 1 square. But after bishop takes rook, queen recaptures. OK, Magnus didn't find any of the top 3 moves there. I was going to say the queen protects the knight and the game goes on. But Magnus, he's giving up the material in a different way. And now, after dropping back the knight, black is simply going to take this rook and then capture this pawn. And black is up a rook for a bishop. And not just that, but this pawn, long term, look at where it's going to promote to. The black pawn is going to promote to this square, which is covered by the black bishop. And this has happened on the board. Magnus now, I think he's in big, big trouble. He's just plonked his bishop in the centre of the board. Nice square, but it's not enough compensation. Rooks are going to be more important than the bishop and knight here. And this black pawn, I think, is just going to win the game long term.
Wow.
Once it starts running, it's going to really sprint up the board.
Yeah, that's no other words for it. That's a passer, David.
Yeah.
Like you say, the most important thing is that it can be escorted to the promotion square by the dark square bishop. Yep. And take a look at the coordination between white's pieces. You look at the rook.
Yep.
On next to the king. Look at the queen still on her starting square. Take a look at the potential of the black rooks. They can get motoring behind their own passed pawns. I mean, so many lines. Magnus is, I was going to say losing.
Yeah. Quite, I think with best play, for sure, he's losing, but he will hope that his one good piece in the position will give him some compensation. Maybe later this pawn will drop off, maybe later some threats against the black king, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Abdusattorov, meanwhile, just shuffling across with his rook. Slightly surprising, because I thought his rook wanted to back up this pawn later, but he's just keeping everything guarded. Black's actually done the hard work. Black has won material, and wow, Magnus is
just trading queens.
He's trading queens. Woo. He's down on material, and he's just offering a trade.
And Abdusattorov.
Are you surprised he does not take it?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just say, OK, let's get those queens off. No more risk for black, and I'm just ahead on material. But Abdusattorov, that's the reason he's the world rapid champion and I'm not, because he senses the dynamics better than most players. And now actually he's gaining time, hitting this undefended pawn with his queen. And maybe he's realising that actually, if you traded queens, white's rook would at least have jumped into the game. For example, trade here, and now white's rook is activated with the bishop. Maybe the white knight will jump in later on. Yeah, I actually like his decision better than mine. yeah, keeping the queens on, there's no rush to trade. It's human instinct when you're up to simplify like a maths equation, trade off pieces, hope your extra material counts later on. But this queen is actually maybe, at least for now, better than its counterpart.
Yeah, but that's kind of a sin in a way that you make you should always back up your evaluation and your assumptions by actual calculation. You shouldn't just assume, you know, like you say, you know, queen takes queen, rook takes queen. Oh, I'll be better.
Yeah, exactly. No
and
risk,
that's when mistakes happen. And it might not be a mistake there and then, but then you kind of carry on that mentality throughout and you slip up, get lazy.
Yeah, and actually, not just is this pawn attacked, but Abdusattorov, I think he's looked really deeply into the position. He's realised this is White's best piece. It's supported and protected by a pawn. So next move, if White, for example, takes a timeout to just push this pawn or defend it, then Black is going to undermine the defence, the defender of this bishop. This pawn now, once it gets traded off, which it will, then suddenly we'll lose protection of this bishop. This bishop will be forced to step back, retreat, and White will have no good pieces remaining. This one looks one-sided right now. Abdusattorov, a big favourite to win this game.
Wow, and look at the clocks as well. He's just crushing Magnus as well on the clocks right now.
Yeah, quick, confident, tricky, resourceful. He's got it all, Abdusattorov. And yeah, I mean, I was surprised. I thought maybe even with his performance in the World Rapid Championship, it would take him a tournament or two on the tour just to warm up, just to get acclimatised to playing these top guys. No.
Nope.
A draw against Giri in the first game, very nice result. Now, big advantage against the world champion. Okay, White's knight now blocking the Black's queen. It's diagonal, but it's temporary. It's going to get kicked away, that White knight, soon.
And the Black Queen slowly improving himself. This is ice-cold chess. You know, I was expecting Black to perhaps utilise the rook that's not in action, but instead he focuses on moving the queen and getting ready to make that pawn break that you suggested.
Yeah, that Black A pawn. I think last season on the tour we christened her Alice from Alice in Wonderland. But that Black A pawn is just going to start running, kicking the White knight in the process. Yeah, the bar. Sometimes we say we don't trust the computer or the evaluation bar. Here we can.
And we can because it says 1.7. But OK, now it changed. But that was almost 17, and he's 17 years old.
You're turning into a chess player, Kara, seeing those patterns everywhere.
Recognising those numbers.
Yes.
We always look for those type of small signs. Yeah, and you can see Abdusattorov is...
Yeah, you know, in Norwegian, because I followed, of course, the Norwegian show for the Rapid and Blitz World Championship, and in Norwegian you would say Abdusattorov.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to switch to English. Abdusattorov. Abdusattorov. Yes.
Very posh.
Yes,
formal
it's
English.
very posh.
But yeah, I mean, sorry.
No.
I was going to change the topic completely.
Yeah, me too, so that was okay.
Go ahead, you guys.
I was just going to say the reason we can trust the evaluation bar, the computer here, is because if we do a quick count of the material, Black simply has a rook for a knight advantage. And that's a 2-point advantage, and here the computer says 2.3. So that's why we have this evaluation system, the counting system in chess. It's not always a steadfast rule. Sometimes material is less important than the actual quality of the pieces, but here, everything else is equal. The rooks are better than White's knight here. So, yeah, a +1, +2 advantage minimum for Black.
And I have to say, Abdusattorov is actually playing rather like Magnus, you know, following his philosophy. Because Magnus really believes in this, you know, using all your pieces. Teamwork makes the dream work. And there he is, you know, he's activating the rook that wasn't in play and he improves it before he initiates any form of action. So Magnus is kind of going to be feeling the heat, and he pushes his pawn 1 square forward. I'm not quite sure what it's doing, but I think anything goes in this position.
Yeah, I guess Magnus wants to push the pawn next to it, the White D pawn, forward 2 squares to block the effect of Black's dark squared bishop. It doesn't feel like it's going to be that effective, the plan. It's also a very slow plan. Now Black does have time, for example, I was going to say, to push pawns forward, kick back White's knight, but Magnus simply had nothing else. The one thing I'll say in Magnus's defence here is, if we rewind to the World Championship match, I think it was game 4 against the Annapolnici, Magnus kind of lost/blundered a rook for knight, and there he held on to make a draw. So, yeah, let's not write him off yet. White is in big trouble here, but if anyone can save it, it is Magnus Carlsen. And we see a trade of rooks, Black in the meantime trying to trade off some pawns. And there we go, it was a trade, but White's queen jumping in. I'm wondering whether Abdusattorov underestimated this, White's two pieces are actually under fire now. The white bishop and white queen attacked by, and white knight attacked by black's queen. But Magnus keeping things together with tricks.
Oh, that is a nice, tricky move because, you know, it does look at first glance that the white knight is on breeze, but nope, there would be a nasty hidden check.
Yeah, we have to show that, Jovanka.
Yeah.
This is the nastiest type of trick. Just to show what Magnus did, if we rewind a few moves, in this position, it looks like big trouble. The bishop under attack, the white knight under attack as well. Magnus counterattacked. We talked about that earlier. He counterattacked. So now, if the black queen moves, if she captures either of these two pieces, the black rook would fall. So black's rook, a bit loose here. He decided to run away, protecting this pawn near the king. And now, after queen takes pawn, the trap Jovanka mentioned. If queen takes knight, getting greedy, greed is punished by bishop takes pawn, check, hitting the black king, and next move, we realise that the black queen is under fire, a discovered attack against the black queen. So, yeah, big, big trap in the position there. But Abdusattorov, he's sharp, he sees these things so quickly, and he just ignored this knight, which is not actually up for grabs. He just pushed his pawn. And this pawn now only 3 squares away from promotion. It's not going to be easy to get there, but if it does, it's protected by the black bishop.
It can actually get there right now if white is a little bit careless. So white plays a non-move. I don't know. Yeah, for instance, that you can actually push the pawn right now because, hey, that queen is a big, big defender of the bishop, and white just cannot capture that runaway pawn.
Yep. If white does capture, then suddenly the bishop does fall.
And that would be game over.
Instantly. So actually, you're right, Jovanka. I kind of wrote it off after this pawn push. I thought, OK, the white queen is defending this square, the white bishop's defending this square, the black pawn isn't going anywhere soon. But maybe with those tricks, with those ideas, black can, just by brute force, push this pawn forward. And yeah, it's now slightly less material deficit for white. White has won a pawn over the last few moves, so now it's a knight and pawn for the black rook, but it's all about this guy. And this pawn looking very, very scary. Also the clock. Magnus down to 2 minutes. You normally never see him in this situation, down on the clock by so much. It's looking very, very good for black here.
We could have the first big, shocking result here in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour coming up if the 17-year-old making his debut in the tour is able to beat the world champion. Now, Levon Aronian winning 2 games in a row now, winning also his game against Alexander Kostenyuk. So that's 2 wins so far after 2 rounds for Levon Aronian. Great start.
Yeah, he's a man on fire. I think one of the informed players of the year.
Definitely, yeah. Doing great also in the Grand Prix, where he came second.
Yeah, and last season, actually, the second half of the tour, he was one of the most impressive, Levon Aronian.
Yeah.
Magnus said it himself. Something about him just clicked. He was playing so speedy, so fast, treating his opponents like they were patzes, as we say in chess, like weak players. He was just showing them no respect, and that was paying off. His opponents would get scared and crumble.
He really did figure out that online rapid chess thing. Just, you know, he's a fantastic chess player. He was in the start of the season as well, but just the format. He just figured it out and just crushed it.
And he also kind of changed style because I've kind of christened him like Mr. Center, you know, take the center and just develop the pieces. And instead he was playing all sorts of like quirky openings, and he would consistently ask his opponents, hey, what you going to do? And he would always do this by playing quickly on the clock as well. Yeah. And on the board, it's Magnus who is very clearly suffering because that passed pawn Alice is runaway train, and she's really going to push forward 2 squares to her destination. I don't see anything.
Yeah, it's really backs to the wall for Magnus Carlsen. His last move, I like it for white. He's blunted the effect of that black bishop. That black bishop now has lost connection to the promotion square of that black pawn. And meanwhile, temporarily at least, white's knight, white's bishop, they do prevent the advance of black's pawn, but it looks like a short-term measure. White's pieces are a bit loose. They all defend each other right now, but as long as you dislodge one of those pieces, I think the others might get kicked away as well. So black's rook can actually move right now.
So,
I'm not sure which square it should choose, but the black rook could move.
So the move that I'm really tempted to play, I don't know whether it works, I need some calculation, is actually to move the rook along the C line.
Okay.
Because white's king is not that safe. There's a lot of air around the king, shall we say. And it's
feeling very lonely.
It is feeling very lonely. And my instinct here now, and I haven't backed it up with any calculation, is to move this. And I just want to see if black can get a bit fruity so that when the white knight jumps in to block that line, maybe he can just go, hey, I know you're threatening to go knight check, but maybe I can actually push my pawn.
Wow, OK. Interesting. So pushing this pawn, hoping to deflect the white bishop, and then just capture this white knight.
Now, there does involve a calculation because there's checks involved in the game. But OK, instead we see a different approach from Abdusattorov.
Yeah, I liked your move, actually, I must say, much more, Jovanka. Instead, Abdusattorov has played his bishop to this square. That's sneaky. It looks like the bishop is about to drop. It looks like it's a loose square, but suddenly the white queen would be deflected away and the white knight would fall. And actually, I think the white knight is needed to stop the advance of this pawn. So this exchange would favour black. But after the bishop moved, it wasn't captured, and white just dropped his bishop back. Magnus now firmly blockading this pawn. And wow, I was going to say Abdusattorov has to take a time out, protect his bishop, but no. He's so sharp, so sneaky, so tricky, bringing his queen back and now undermining the white queen. Now the white queen has a decision to make. If she takes this bishop, the knight falls. So she couldn't go for this. Also, no trade possible here. If you take the queens off the board, the black rook is simply going to come down and dislodge the white bishop. So, OK, very clever move there by Abdusattorov. Ingenious in a way, but now white stepping back. What's going to happen here if the black rook attacks the white queen? It looks like all of white's pieces are really hanging by a thread now. I mean, the queen is needed to protect this knight, which is needed to protect this bishop. It's all, I mean, it's like a pack of cards. If you knock one over, the rest might fall as well, like dominoes even. But maybe Magnus can keep this together with tricks. Maybe he can jump forward with his knight to block the attack against his queen. I don't like it for white still, but there's no killer blow yet. Magnus defending like a lion in this game.
And you still have to remember that the black king is a little bit by itself, a little bit vulnerable in the light squares. So I think Magnus is maybe dreaming about aligning the queen and bishop on the same diagonal and trying to do something.
That's why maybe Abdusattorov decided to move his king forward off this diagonal. But yeah, you mentioned Kaya. Yeah, this does feel a bit slow. It feels like black has just retreated the queen. Sometimes you can justify a retreat if you have more active moves coming next. But then he took another timeout, a second timeout, just to improve his king. And I'm trying to work out why this is a mistake. Maybe the white knight can jump in now. And there we go. Actually, white has several knight moves that might cause some annoyance to black. White has 3 knight moves, as we see Stockfish, the computer suggesting now. This may be the most natural. It does happen in the position. Suddenly, there are some threats against the black king side. This black bishop on a very loose square. I didn't like putting it there in the first place. And now I'm trying to work out what would happen after the rook comes across to attack the white queen. But then it looks like these pieces protecting each other, the white queen could eliminate the dangerous black pawn. And suddenly it's anyone's game. Suddenly white might be the one with the momentum. So in the current position, a big, big threat. Queen takes pawn, but also maybe knight takes bishop. How does Abdusattorov defend against both? Not easy anymore. Just one slip, and the world champion is right back in it. Magnus fighting still so hard.
Wow.
There's a lot of danger in the position. I do like Magnus's move, but the first move that comes to mind for black is actually, OK, let's just go in with the queen. Let's gamble absolutely everything and bank on some counter-attacking possibilities so that after knight takes bishop, you're like, I am not taking that knight. I'm going to take...
This would be disastrous. Checkmate.
That would be bad. And instead just go queen takes bishop, but then the queen will slide itself across 2 squares and lining itself up, and suddenly checkmating ideas in the air. And the queen-knight, dangerous combination.
Yeah. The knight does the only type of maneuver that the queen cannot, and that makes them a fearsome duo. They combine so well. Actually, here I would be terrified with black that I would be getting checkmated. The black queen looks great, but she's offside. She's not actually helping the fighter. For example, if the black queen retreats, trying to trade off, then the white knight would leap forward, and a double attack. The black king has to move, and more nasty checks in the air. And wow, this might actually happen.
Wow.
Will we see a turnaround? The black queen has jumped in. Magnus now has no choice. He simply has to capture this bishop, I think.
Yeah.
He has to go on the counterattack because his own bishop is about to fall. No time to move it.
Okay.
So knight takes bishop, queen takes. And actually, while you were talking there, Jovanka, I realized maybe there's a way to force a draw if white wants. Maybe white wants more, but maybe you can even go knight check, attacking the black king. The black king has to keep protecting its rook. And if you take this knight, check, the king moves, another check, the king moves, another check, and this would end the game in a repetition, a draw. Yeah,
nice line.
No way to escape.
And very, very thematic. But let's go back to the position where the knight and the queen are aligned together. And OK, he's going to go
Knight takes
for it.
bishop. Queen takes bishop, and now the move. Okay, he's gone for the win, not taking the draw, Magnus Carlsen. He's aligned his queen with the black king.
Okay. How to defend?
Yeah,
I mean, this double check that you mentioned, how on earth are we going to do it? I mean, it's maybe the king can hide itself. I have an idea. The king can hide itself, not on the back row, but on the h6 square.
Ooh, I don't think you want to run that immediately because there would be a checkmate.
No, not immediately, but
next move.
Yeah, next move. Yeah, that's my safe place. So what I want to do is, okay, so first of all, I have to check with the queen on the light square.
Okay.
And the king moves forward, and now the queen will dash back and offer a trade.
Okay, and now the white knight, I guess, I'm trying to choose a square, maybe this one still. So a double attack, as we mentioned.
And then the king can hide itself on the sixth row.
Yeah, and then there would be a check. And if the king takes this knight...
Oh no, I'm going to get checkmated again.
Yeah, this queen takes pawn and a checkmate. So white would actually be a whole rook down, but the king would be trapped. And wow, are we heading towards this in the current position? Okay, he's given a check on a different square. This move would have lost, I think, but he's checked on this square, hitting the white king. How will white block? White will push this pawn to block, or this pawn, or this pawn. I'm not sure which one. You can move any of these 3 pawns to block this check.
Let's just choose a random one.
Okay, let's say this one's the most advanced pawn. Let's push this one forward. I also want to use the queen to maybe guard against this pawn later. And now black still has this big issue. Okay, Magnus actually goes for that block. And now how to deal with this tension.
Now because he's pushed that particular pawn, the queen can actually defend against the checkmate by putting herself on the b2 square. Long range defense.
Ooh, clever.
Yeah.
So using the queen on this diagonal to stop any potential checks. And maybe this, yeah, it's happened. Jovanka, you found it. Maybe the only defense for Abdusattorov, because now a knight check, a double check, for example, this double check forcing the king to move would not end in disaster for black anymore, because this square, which was previously used by the white queen, is actually covered by black's queen from afar. Wow, really, really sneaky defense there, really clever defense, and that means Magnus has to check with his knight. Any double check, you have to move your king. And it steps back, and we're going to see a draw. Let's go back to Abdusattorov. We're going to see a repetition of the position. And we actually have Magnus back as well for the first time in the game, but just in time for the position to repeat itself.
Yeah. Wow. How impressed are you with Magnus that he was able eventually to save this, which he probably is about to do?
Yeah, very, very impressed. I mean, full credit to Abdusattorov. Just one slip, really, let Magnus back in the game. But apart from that, he played perfectly. And wow, more credit to him because he's not going for the draw. He wants to win.
Whoa.
This is risky. I kind of wrote it off because now there was no more check with the white knight. But the problem is black's king is still in big, big trouble. And white's knight and queen now combining, attacking the black rook. The black rook has to move. But where do you move it to? Oh, this is playing with fire with black. Yes, black has this amazing pawn on the left side, but he's not getting time to push it.
What happens if you try to just offer up the rook for grabs? Can you do that?
Where do you put it, though?
I want to put it on a square where it's under attack.
Okay, to attack the white queen? Or
to the b8 square is the one I wanted.
Okay, wow.
I wanted to move that knight away because that white knight is a little bit annoying. You know, it's kind of operating within its superpower zone. You know, with the knight jumping from square, it's an octo knight as we kind of call it.
And yeah, actually, we might still see the position repeat itself. White using the queen and knight together, trying to get to the black king, but black's rook is able to just kind of yo-yo back and forth, away from the attack of the white knight, then back to protect its king, away from the attack, back to protect its king, and the position should still repeat itself. Abdusattorov with no time left either, so yeah, I think now is the time to accept the draw. And Magnus still begging for that repetition in a way, but he's going to get it. He's going to save this game. And there we see, now Magnus leaps forward with the knight. He shrugs his shoulders. That's the third time we've seen this position. It's a draw.
Wow. And OK, well, we can see both players sort of a sigh of relief there for Magnus and a smile. He did get away with a draw here.